Hello, my name is Rose Colon, and I will be presenting about Albert Camus and his philosophical views on the absurd. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to address some things that I would talk about, and the following information has I talk about suicide openly, and it might be perceived as inappropriate. I am not encouraging suicide, I'm just explaining and reflecting on the philosophical views of Albert Camus. So he talks about suicide, he does not encourage it whatsoever. So moving on and talking a little bit about him, he was a famous Algerian novelist. He wrote several novels that show his philosophy. Also, he wrote essays talking about it more concisely. His beliefs were focused on the absurd, which is the belief that life has no meaning. On his famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he uses the Greek myth of Sisyphus as an analogy of modern life. As some may know, that the myth talks about a hero that the gods were angry with, so they punished him to push a rock up hills and see it roll back down every time, creating a never-ending cycle of labor and frustration. Now, connecting the myth to modern reality, an average person will wake up, go to work, perform a task, return home, and repeat. There is no higher meaning on this routine, even though this character is going to work every day, earning money and living an average life. His existence is as meaningful as a bomb or a king. Camus explained that when someone is aware of the absurd, then questions and doubts will begin to rise. If life has no meaning, is it worth living? That is the most common question when a person discovers the absurd. Camus says that Sisyphus wondered the same thing, and this character and Sisyphus are trapped in a meaningless life filled with burden of eternal labor. So what's the point? The philosopher predicts that an average individual will come up with three possible answers to the question stated: suicide, philosophical suicide, and acceptance. Camus argued that when a person realized that life has no meaning, he or she would fall into despair or depression. This depression, combined with the belief of the absurd, could yield to suicide. In fact, suicide is a serious issue around the world, and when we look close to those tragic cases, the victims at some point would think about how life is meaningless. His second possible answer to the absurd question is philosophical suicide. This term only implies that the lack of meaning will be matched with religion. As a person falls into despair, this individual will try to seek a higher force that would help them to cope. Camus considers suicide and philosophical suicide quite similar, since one kills the body and the other one kills the spirit or soul. He explains that philosophical suicide is a denial of the absurd or general dissatisfaction. It is taking a leap of faith. Now, the third strategy to cope with a meaningless life is acceptance. So Camus rooted for this third strategy. He tells that accepting life, that life has no meaning, is the right thing to do. Acceptance encourages a person to do what they want without thinking a higher power will punish them for doing so. there is no right or wrong path, and living a life as you want seems quite a happy ending. So there is no higher purpose or fate to follow in this idea. So Albert Camus argues that Sisyphus, even with his punishment, he is happy because he accepted that even though he was a hero, his life is meaningless. His life is pretty much irrational. He cannot commit suicide because he's already dead, and he cannot believe that a savior would help him because the gods did put him in this punishment. So, going again to the character, he could commit suicide or philosophical suicide, yet acceptance could lead to a more peaceful style of life because he can control his own existence. Um, Camus shows this acceptance in action in his novel The Stranger. The novel follows a man that accepts his fate but is perceived as callous or insensitive. On the novel, Meursault, the character, is at his mother's funeral, but he does not cry. When he is forced to kill a person and he is convicted, he is judged more for the lack of emotion rather than his actual crime. And though it was self-defense, he is condemned to death because he was perceived as cold-blooded, because he just accepted whatever it was coming. Knowing the Camus philosophy, you see that he's not cold-blooded, he's just accepting life how it is. So Meursault is the perfect absurd hero. And the myth of Sisyphus and the stranger complement each other. One gives the terms and the other shows them in action. Personally, I find Albert Camus' philosophical views very interesting because they can be perceived as harsh or negative at first because he suggests suicide as an option, but he is really being brutally honest because a person with depression will consider suicide as an answer at some point, and he addresses the issue directly. I also like that he doesn't try to sell acceptance as immediate happiness. He does not say you accept that life is meaningless and soon everything will be amazing and rainbows and unicorns. In the end, there is a really positive message on his philosophy because it tells you just to accept what you have, the life that you have, and work with it and be happy with it. And I really like it because it motivates a person, like I say, to be happy with the life that they have. And it's really funny because he tells that Sisyphus is happy even though he has a really harsh life with that punishment, but he says he's happy. And if he is happy, why can we not? So Albert Camus kind of gives an inspiration for those who are broken or angry at life. So it's a really good positive message in the end. I would like to recommend to my friends and to anyone to read about him. And it is pretty easy to understand his words, and he's pretty straightforward, and he doesn't use an archaic type of English, so it's really easy to understand him. And that's about it about my presentation. I'm really happy that I got to talk about Albert Camus since I like him so much. Thank you for your attention. Bye bye.